Hey everyone, this is part 2 of week 3 when we're talking about qualitative research methods. And this part has more to do with your Atlas.ti assignment, so I kind of wanted to separate it out. So basically it's called I Have Data, Now What? Um, but also as a reminder, we did already talk about qualitative methods in PH 563, CBPR class. Um, so the next few slides, slides 2 through 17, is actually a review. Feel free to re-listen to that recording. It is from the other class. But slides 18 on are new slides and something that I'm recording right now. And then at the end, I will explain the Atlas.ti assignment. And then because I have to show you live and share my screen, I will do a Zoom video showing you how to complete the assignment since we have to log into the Atlas.ti software. So again, this is part 2. I have data now what? With a review on coding and themes, which is relevant for the assignment, so it's good to review. But if you kind of remember some of those things, 18 on is new where I explain the assignment, and then again, I'll link you to the other video where we actually walk through it.
You're going to start creating and thinking about codes. So the purpose of coding that information that you have, and again, this assignment, we're not doing it 100% traditional with verbatim transcripts and coding, but I still want you to kind of understand what it means to code, and that is really to look for something that is explaining something and or relationship. So it kind of helps build larger concepts, which eventually become your theme. Now there's two different types of codes. A lot of times when, especially if you've done research prior, you kind of know, the literature. So this is the baggage that you bring with you. So you know that some people will talk about barriers, and it might be related to transportation and childcare. So if you're doing a lot of interviews, it's good to have a list of codes, but especially since we're just doing one interview, you don't have to do that, but I still wanted to kind of cover what it means to code. So having a set of codes is good to start with, especially if you've done some research, but also be open to inductive coding. So that could be in vivo, meaning you're taking the actual words from a participant, or some theme that's emerging. So you might have had an idea that, I'm going to do this interview about barriers, and I kind of from the literature know about 5 barriers, but maybe in your particular community, in that particular time and setting, there's some other barrier that emerges. You're like, wow, I never really thought about that. And then that also becomes now a new code. So here it just kind of illustrates that you might start off with codes that you think, a participant or a set of participants are going to talk about, but also be open to codes that are emerging and are new, which is, the purpose of qualitative work, trying to figure out and explore what people are saying from their perspective. And as I mentioned, your codes can turn into themes. So let's say you're interviewing and you're asking, what are some barriers to, participating in programs, and someone says, childcare and just low energy. You might start to code that as, literally childcare or energy. But then at the end, when you're really looking at your different codes, you realize, oh, childcare and energy have to do with barriers. So now your set of codes, which might be 2 or more, really speak to the theme of barriers. So when you're writing this up, you would say, one theme that came from, my talk was barriers. And for barriers, what we identified was childcare and low energy and or transportation. So that's how codes, multiple codes can turn into a larger theme. Again, if you are doing a ton of interviews, you definitely want to start off with a code list, and especially if you're working with someone and you're both coding. But we're just doing one interview. but I didn't want to leave out, something that you might use in the future if you do end up doing qualitative work and doing more interviews or more focus groups. So just for the purposes of knowing that, you always want to make sure, if you do that, have a code book that's pretty lean. I always say it's downhill after 30, and not age, just 30 codes. So you don't need a long list, and you kind of want to make it just as lean as possible, and then use those codes to help shape the different ideas and themes that end up popping out. Similar to what I said, so the codes emerge, and especially if you're doing semi-structured, they're going to emerge from your research questions. They could evolve, something new could happen, but you could also use the participants' language. I know that when I was interviewing Pacific Islanders, the concept of talk story came up a lot, so that became one of my codes. So I used the participants' own language around the idea of how people share information, which was talk story. So those are just different ways and some considerations around what your codes might be. And here's an example code book. For this assignment, you don't need a code book, but if you ever have a larger qualitative project, here's an example that you could look at. And overall, as you code, take into account the context, allow codes to evolve from the participants' language or perspective. You're really trying to capture ideas and really think about process and context rather than kind of counting the codes. So again, it's not completely psychometric approach and not completely heuristic, you're kind of in the middle, but you do want to understand the person's context, perspective, and process. And here's a strategy. If you were doing 20 documents and you were working with someone, there's also something called memo writing. So you can just look at the documents, start thinking about codes, code half, and then go back, work with someone and talk about it, and then finish out your documentation. So if you were doing more than one interview, this is just an overall strategy, but you won't need to do that for this class. We're just going to do one very well done interview. Okay, so let's take a look at a quick example. As you know, my work is with Pacific Islanders, and here's just a little bit of information. We did 10 key informant interviews and 3 focus groups, and the goal was to inform the development of an intervention. Now, one thing I'll ask you to do is pause right here, and what I want you to do is read each paragraph and think about what code you would apply to that. So I'll give you one example, which is the first one. To find people, you would have to go through the old establishment, like civic clubs or hula halau or culture groups that have come together and have been together for a while. So if I'm reading that, I'm thinking, okay, so they're mentioning cultural organizations, and that might make me think there's something around recruitment, and especially where it says to find people. So I might come up with a code that says cultural organizations, and then kind of sometimes people put /recruitment if you're starting to think about the theme. Well, really quickly, I'll go to the second one too, because that one's really obvious. Trust is important to us, and they go on to explain why. And so I would literally have a code that says trust. And in my work, it did come up a lot. So if you want to pause, kind of look at the 4 different paragraphs and think about what potential concepts or codes could these quotes be talking about. Okay, hopefully you were able to look at some of those quotes. Here are some of my actual results. Was that we came up with 4 themes, and it was semi-structured, so we kind of had these themes kind of laid out, but it was reach and recruitment, identifying barriers, and then I also asked questions about how to overcome barriers, And then I also asked questions about, the community's interest in different health topics that could work for a community-based intervention. So those ended up being the 4 themes. And so just to kind of go over, you can see that here's a quote, but here are some other results from ways to reach Pacific Islanders. It could be through churches, festivals, etc. So that's one theme. The second thing was barriers. So for my work, I identified lack of trust, pride, transportation, and there's a quote to kind of show that. And then another theme was, well, how do you overcome barriers? And it had to do with, building trust, personal invitations, and following cultural protocols. And then just below that, you can see a quote that kind of exemplifies this theme as well. And then lastly, there's a theme around health topics of interest, and largely it was diabetes and obesity. And here, I really like this quote because you really have to read into it. It says, back in the island, we were growing up, and I said, we ate, we went out and played, came back and ate. Here, meaning here in the US, we ate and we didn't go play. And that's the big thing too, is that we don't know moderation. So they're really talking about energy in, energy out. And basically, eating and, for nutrition, but then also being able to expend that energy. And then the second concept was, actually, I think I just coded, healthy eating, moderation, or something to that extent. And so kind of just reading this, you can kind of see like where's, a code might be energy balance, or healthy eating and physical activity. And then also you kind of threw in also moderation. So you kind of have to really read these quotes to figure out, what is it that they're trying to say. But in this case, this was just one example as far as figuring out what are some topics of interest.
All right, this is slide 18, just in case you weren't able to see the enumeration. This is the first couple of slides, well, 2 through 17 before this were a review. So now I'm just kind of picking up where we left off. And hopefully from the prior slides, you were able to learn a little bit more about how to code, how to get those codes into themes, and sort of how to, put all that information together. But thinking about the Pick Health study overall, those who were involved in either a key informant interview or a focus group, there were 36 people that provided qualitative data. And after looking at that information, it really helped to inform what we were going to add into our quantitative survey, which questions to ask, and also it provided us with options. So if we're asking about barriers, we know to include transportation, we know to include trust in knowing someone, we know to include childcare. So all of that came from the qualitative information. So again, kind of speaking to bullet point 2, both the qualitative and quantitative data work together to help inform topic areas of interest and strategies that we could use for working with the NHPI community. Particularly, it provided culturally relevant recruitment information and also intervention strategies. So again, qualitative data led to a larger quantitative survey where instead of 36 people, because it's qualitative is really hard to have a lot of people, with the quantitative we were able to have over 160 surveys filled out. But again, together that helped informed a pilot study. And here's the pilot study. So it was actually funded by CTRI at UCSD. It was an academic community partnership pilot project grant. And in the pictures, there's myself, Dr. Camille Nebeker from UCSD, my co-academic partner, and my community partner, CLC VML of Ramana Fitness. And him and his family own both a gym, and a hula halau. So that is where this first pilot project started. And as you saw from the qualitative and quantitative data that we collected, there was a huge interest in physical activity. So that was this project, and here are a few pictures. You can see we tried to incorporate physical activity and also other activities that might be more culturally informed or relevant, like outrigger canoeing, working with outside material. But again, hopefully this gave you a good idea of how you can work with qualitative and quantitative data to help inform an actual study. So this was, again, from Pick Health, and we call this the Ramana pilot study. And actually, to this date, it's still ongoing, and we've actually grown. So in the pictures here was when we had adults only, but now I was able to secure more funding, and we're doing kind of a multi-generational approach, and we include children to older ages, and then we're also including some nutrition information. So this pilot, was able to give us, again, more information and feedback, which then again informed another bigger pilot to include more intervention strategies. So again, hopefully gives you a good idea of how research grows, especially when you're starting from the very beginning and getting that qualitative information. All right, so again, the Atlas.ti assignment is due Sunday the 22nd. What you're going to do, and I'm going to have another video that actually walks you through the steps of the software. I'm going to do it through Zoom since I have to share my screen and kind of show you live how to do this. But the first step is really to upload a transcript. And I have another example that I will attach that you should save to your computer somewhere. And then you're going to upload the transcript into the software, into Atlas.ti. And then using the program, you're going to code your data. And I'm going to show you how to do that in the Zoom video. And then the third thing is something that you could do in the program itself, but then it gets just a little bit more complicated. And I just want to kind of show you the basics of Atlas.ti. But once you've combined and looked at all of the codes, you start to think about, well, what themes do these speak to? And that you can kind of more do in your writing. If you want to figure out how to look at codes and combine them in Atlas.ti, more power to you. But it's a little bit more complicated. But at the very least for this assignment, I just want to see that everyone knows how to upload a transcript, code the data, and then as you write, really think about what themes are represented by all of these codes. And really it's a one-page results write-up, and I'm going to go over just a little bit of an example of what I expect for the write-up. Okay, so for your write-up guide, again, it's only one page, 1.5 space. The first thing you're going to do is describe, how many themes you came up with, and maybe you even thought of some sub-themes. I'll leave that up to you. Again, don't worry about whether an answer is right or wrong. The nice thing, and sometimes the tough thing about qualitative work, it is very subjective. So one thing is nice is that when we do these activities in class, we're all doing the same assignment or looking at the same transcript, but everybody comes up with slightly different ways of looking at the information. So again, don't worry, like, did I pick the right theme or not? Do your best. Again, it's very subjective. Of course, if you're way off and talking about a different subject, then yeah, that might not be as correct. But again, do your best to figure out, looking at a transcript and looking at the codes, what themes pop out. And then you're going to discuss each theme and include a quote as an example. On the second page, I know this is only a one page, but I did want to see a screenshot of your Atlas.ti coding. So once you have at least a page of coding done, I think there's only 1.5 pages of transcript, but once you've coded a page, you're able to see the coding on the right-hand side. So that's what I would like you to take a screenshot of and submit that just as the second page as a picture, just so that I could see you were able to get into the program and you were able to do some coding. And this, of course, you can submit in Cougar Course. So I will, again, link a video to show you exactly how to code using Atlas.ti. But I know sometimes it's tough to think about, like, well, how do I write this up without an example? Just to give you a really broad outline, you generally want to start out with, what we're going to pretend we had more interviews, even though I'm only giving you one transcript. So you can start off by saying something like key informant interviews provided insight into better understanding how da 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 da. So you're kind of positioning what the research is about. And of course, the transcript is coming from Pick Health again, so you can say to better understand potential health programs for Pacific Islanders. That would be fair and pretty broad. But then you want to get into the themes that you identified. And so then you'll start talking about the themes and say 4 themes were identified in the qualitative portion of this work. The first theme is XYZ, the second, third, fourth, and again, maybe you come up with 2 themes, or maybe you come up with 4 or 5. It's really up to you to look at your codes and really think about what themes come out. And then you'll say, these themes help contextualize and has implications for XYZ. Generally, you don't talk about implications in a results section. So this is kind of just for this assignment, just so I can kind of see and understand your line of thinking of where these themes came from, but also, why are these themes important? Again, that's kind of more for discussion, but we're just kind of adding this in our 1-page example. And then you're going to talk about each theme. So I would just label it really clearly. Theme 1 is barriers, and this theme focuses on, whether participants can, decide to participate in an intervention or whatever it is. And then, generally, and then you're going to describe it a little bit more. So generally, participants felt that these were some of the factors and some of the barriers, X, Y, Z. Again, I'm kind of using plural, so we're going to pretend that you've analyzed, 10 key informant interviews. But again, you're only looking at 1 transcript. But feel free to go kind of write it up as if you looked at a bunch. So again, you can say generally participants felt that this was a barrier and that was a barrier, and just kind of talk about the theme a little bit based on what you read in the transcript. And then end with a quote. As one participant mentioned, quote, childcare is a barrier and it would be nice to see improvement in that area, or whatever, quotes you can find. And then you just kind of go through and do the same thing for the next theme. So maybe the next theme you found is motivation. And then you say this concept centers on how participants felt about XYZ. After you go through all the themes that you've identified, I didn't include it here, but maybe have one more short paragraph wrapping it up, kind of reiterating. Again, this doesn't typically go in results, but for this assignment, you want to say, this work identified 4 themes, and this helps to better understand, So kind of bring it in full circle. So again, here's a little bit of a very broad outline that you could use for your 1-page write-up that you will do and code from Atlas.ti. And again, feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and look for the Zoom link that is going to show you exactly how to enter your transcript and do the coding within Atlas.ti.